Hey there. I can see we've got a few people in already. If you guys can just wait a few minutes, because we've got quite a few people who are scheduled to join and a few people still coming on. So I'm just going to put myself on mute for the next minute or two, and we'll see how many people end up coming in, and then we should start fairly soon. Thank you for showing up so far, guys. Hey everybody. He is gonna go ahead and just get his slideshow up and start sharing his screen, and then we'll give it one more minute. So we'll get going at, let's say, 11:04, just to give a few people some time to get in, and then yeah, we'll get going from that point onwards. Perfect. So let's get going. Before Pete goes ahead and starts presenting, I should introduce myself. My name is Jaffa. I'm part of the client success team at Arthur and Xero, and I'm one of the financial specialists. So I work a lot with clients who are integrated to Xero and QuickBooks. And this is Pete, who is one of our accredited accountants. He previously gave a presentation, I think 3 months or so ago, and it was really well received. Everyone really enjoyed it, so we thought we'd bring him in for another one. Today, he's going to be talking about the concept of managing rent arrears and saving time and money through optimizing your Arthur and Xero setup, and it's specifically covering like credit control policies, actually measuring the rent arrears effectively, and then 3 efficient ways of managing it. So without further ado, I will put myself on mute and let Pete share his screen and get ready. And thank you so much, guys, for registering to attend. Pete, just let you know you're not actually sharing your screen yet.
Oh, hi there. Thanks very much, Jafar, and thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to join today.
Pete, sorry, you're not actually sharing your screen.
Okay, just 1 second, please. Sorry about this.
That's all right.
Share. Is that okay now, Jafar?
Perfect. Yes, I'll put myself on mute again. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so in terms of our agenda today, so there's 3 components. So first of all, I want to talk about tools and strategies to manage rent arrears, the management information that you should be using, or that I recommend that you use to manage rent arrears. And then finally, the 3 ways Arthur and Line can help you to save time and money. Okay. So as just Jafar has mentioned, the Astute Landlord, we're accredited financial advisors. We're experts in Arthur Online, and we're accredited in Xero as well. So just to mention that as sort of background. So moving on. So credit control policies. So I guess all we're trying to say here really is that given that there's so many tools and there's so many strategies that you can use to manage rent arrears, we really recommend that your company has a formalized credit control policy, and I guess more importantly, the company has written procedures which are made available to staff, and that staff then follow in a consistent and disciplined way. It's very easy in rent arrears for I guess for things to drift. If any of you have ever watched Slum Landlords, Nightmare Tenants with Paul Champlain, it often horrifies me you know, how much rent arrears can actually grow and the amounts that can be involved. And you know, I watch that program and I often think, how did the arrears get to those levels? And therefore, you know, having a credit control policy and procedures, you know, are your best defense as potentially as a landlord or a letting agency that you get on top of and don't let the arrears grow to unmanageable levels. So in terms of key tools and strategies, many of you will already be familiar with those tools and strategies. But I just wanted to spend a few minutes to run through them here, given their sort of fundamental importance, okay? So preventative actions. It's very obvious, but do your due diligence on new tenants, and whether that be employment checks, credit checks, previous landlord checks. The second thing that you can do is to make it easy for tenants to pay the rent. And some of you will familiar with Go Cardless, which is an automated mechanism where a landlord or letting agency can actually each month pull the monthly rent amount from the tenant's bank account, rather than waiting for the tenant to actually push or pay over the amount. I've used Go Cardless extensively in my own business and with lettings agencies that I work with, and it is a fantastic tool, and it does give a lot of certainty around rent collection. In terms of preventative actions, I think one tool that I think is going to grow more popular over time is to try and get a guarantor for the tenancy. Obviously, in student lets and student HMOs, that's probably been quite an established tool, but I suspect in HMO world and single let world, now that the legal process is going to take longer and going to be more protracted, I think we're going to see an increase or growth in tenancies where a guarantor is requested. And then finally, in terms of preventative actions, one option available, particularly I guess in the market of employed tenants, is rent and guarantee insurance, which again, as you'll be aware, for a small premium, what this will do, the rent and guarantee insurance will pay out in the event that the tenant doesn't pay the insurance company. An example of whom is Alan Boswell. They will pay the monthly rent and potentially cover the legal expenses associated with a tenancy that's gone wrong. So again, it's a great tool that's available to prevent significant rent arrears. Okay, so that's covering off on preventative actions. In terms of arrears management strategies, so once a tenant is got into arrears, so I think the key thing is, whether you're a landlord or a lettings agency, I think it's important to invest time within your organisation on this matter, and I would suggest that you need to hold a formal credit control meeting within your organisation at least once a month. Another step to manage arrears is to actually make sure that you pick up the phone and speak to the tenant. It's very easy to get into a situation where we just send off emails and SMS messages to the tenant because it's something that's easy to do and you can demonstrate that you've done something. But what I've found in practice is that if you can get engagement with the tenant, you can find out enormous amount about their situation, why they're not paying the arrears, but also some other interesting information which may help you in terms of your strategy for managing the arrears. So I would really encourage everybody to make sure that picking up the phone is part of their processes. The third thing is to know precisely when you'll issue Section 28 and Section 8 and Section 21 notices. So this kind of sort of goes back to the Paul Champlina point around, not allowing arrears to grow. So, for example, I work with a portfolio landlord, and we have an agreed process that the minute that the tenant gets into 2 months arrears, we issue the Section 28, and where possible, we issue the Section 21 no fault eviction notice immediately once they get to once they get to 2 months arrears. So, having that sort of defined process takes all the judgment and potential procrastination out of the decision. And generally, sometimes there is a concern around it will damage the relationship with the tenant. But if, as part of that process, you actually explain to the tenants, well, look, the landlord in this situation needs to, protect their position by issuing these notices. If obviously the tenant can remediate the arrears, then obviously we won't look to enforce. The tenant actually do understand the situation. They do understand why the landlord is doing it. So what I would say is, as a piece of advice, in my experience, don't be nervous about or don't fear issuing Section 28 and Section 21 notices, as long as you explain why you're doing it, because generally speaking, tenants will understand why you're doing it. Moving on, again, something that's been around for quite a while, but has been simplified recently, is where you have a universal credit customer. When that customer gets into 2 months worth of arrears, you can actually go onto a website and ask for the payments to be made directly to the landlord, as opposed to the tenant going forward. That's known as the alternative payment arrangement. It's a very good tool. I know landlords have used it successfully to have the payments made direct to them. It takes, I've done one recently, I think it would take, if you've got the right paperwork available, I think it takes no more than 10 minutes to claim online. So if you know that you have a customer who's on universal credit and there's 2 months of arrears, again, I would recommend that as a potential strategy. The next one is money claim online. So as you will already be aware, where a tenant gets into financial trouble, it is possible that the landlord can ask the county court to make a judgment against the tenant for the amount that's owed. That's more commonly known as a CCJ. The money claim online is a website, which is, again, where a landlord can actually start the process at quite a reasonable cost. So again, I don't recommend it for all scenarios, all situations. There are some tenants that don't aspire to home ownership or won't be fazed by a county court judgment against them. So again, it's something to be aware of, but I think it's to be used judiciously. And it's really in the scenario where you believe or reason to believe the tenant's got some assets, or potentially if the guarantor does not wish to actually fulfill their obligations under the guarantee. That is a common use. And finally, the deed of surrender. When a landlord and tenant are able to agree the terms of a tenant leaving the property, what should be done to provide certainty is to execute a deed of surrender, which is basically a document where the tenant agrees that to give up all rights under their tenancy. This is a useful document. It's been around a long time, and I think now that given the court processes are going to be very lengthy in terms of possession claims, I think we're going to see an exponential growth in the use of deed of surrenders to actually bring that tenancy to end and to stop the arrears mounting even further. So I hope you found that slide a useful recap. So moving on to our second section. Our second section then is really about what information should I be using to manage arrears, because obviously we've got Arthur and potentially you've got Xero as well. So what information should we use? So if we step into Xero, so you may or may not be aware, but under accounting, there is what's called an aged receivable summary. And then if we click on that report, you will then see the aged receivable summary report. Now, I find this an enormously helpful report. And for the portfolio landlords that I work with, this is exactly the report that we use to issue the Section 8 notices. And the reason we like it is that we can see it's got across the top of the report, we've got aging. So we know when the tenant, for example, has reached 2 months arrears. So this report I use on a weekly basis, and indeed for some of my clients, this is the only report in Xero that they actually use, but they do look at this very closely. It's probably worth mentioning that within Xero there's something called there's a more detailed version of this, the detailed aged receivables report. So that is available. But as I say, I like this summary report because it has the tenant name and it has the aging and it gives you the total arrears. So it really does, in the click of a button, it really does give you a fantastic view across the entire portfolio. Maybe just to mention, it's not a criticism. There are reports within Arthur that sort of mirror this. I've just found that this report, in my opinion, there's a little bit less information, but it's actually more focused, and it's more links in with our legal framework in terms of 2 months arrears. We need to start taking action. So I do recommend sort of Xero reporting more so than perhaps the Arthur reporting in this regard for this specific need. Okay, so that's the management information side. And so moving on, finally, our final section is really about Arthur Online automation. So just on high level, just to explain that. So Arthur Online automation has got 2 components. So part 1 is a trigger. So we've got to basically create a rule or a trigger that will say, which determines the point at which an action will take. So to give you an example of that, your credit control policy may say that, at day 7, after the rent was due, we need to send an email or we need to call the tenant. So the trigger in this case is day 7, we need to do something, and the rent needs to be unpaid. So that's the trigger. I'll come back to that in a second. Okay. And then part 2 of the automation is there needs to be an action or event, okay, that occurs. So in the case of Arthur, there's 3 things that are possible. Arthur can create a task, Arthur can send an email, or Arthur can send an SMS message. Okay, so that's the two components, triggers and actions. We're now going to take a look at that in more detail. But just to say, Arthur Online is very flexible. The automation can be tailored to your business, your contracts, or your terms of business. So it's very flexible. The one thing I would say is, if you put some automation in place, you just need to test it properly, especially if there's a complex trigger. Okay. So if we just move on from that, so the first one is to create a task to call the tenant. Okay. So as I've touched on earlier, opening and maintaining a dialogue with a problematic tenant is crucial. An automated task can help ensure that the right person is speaking with the tenant at the right time. Okay. So how do we go about that? So first step is we create the trigger. So we go into manage automated events. We choose what part of the tree that we want to place the trigger. In this case, it's financials. So if you can see, I've added a trigger, late rent, follow up on day plus 14. Okay. So that's where we place it in the tree. We now create the trigger. So the key to the trigger is actually the second line there, the method, and the method is timed event. So all that means is the event is driven by the passage of time. So in this case, what we've decided that is at day 14, after the invoice, or sorry, the rent was due. So the due date is minus 14. So the due date was 14 days ago. For transaction types, direct rent and rent charge. So as you all know, direct rent is what landlords use. Rent charge is the transaction type for lettings agencies. So if you put in both, you're going to be covered in all scenarios. And the last part of the trigger is paid is unpaid. So that means that there's been no payment whatsoever of rent. So in the scenario where to put that into words, where there's been no payment towards rent, and the rent was either a landlord rent payment or a rent charge, and the due date was 14 days ago, we're now asking the system to do something, okay? And in this case, the event or the action is going to be to create a task, okay? So let's move on to the creation of the task. So just complete the action name, which is create task to call tenant. That's whatever you find helpful. In the task name, what I like to do is I try to put in, there's automation within the task that will identify the tenancy reference or the name of the tenancy main renter. So I use those because they're very helpful in terms of knowing who you need to call and what tenancy the task relates to. So I populate that in the task name field. The task type in this case would be rent, or it might be rent arrears, whatever you named that within your tasks section of Arthur. And then we add that to the activity log as well, that's being created. But again, that's optional. So every time, so as a result, what's the result of all of this? So every time now going forward, at day 14, where rent has remained unpaid, a task will be assigned to Pete Doherty to actually call the tenant. Okay. So moving on, our second option or of managing rent arrears is to create an arrears email. So it's probably fair to say that if you had to compile an email which accurately summarizes somebody's rent arrears, it would involve manipulating data across multiple systems and time consuming. You'd have to find the email address, you'd have to pull the rent arrears from a finance system potentially. You'd have to bring that all then into your email system. So it's painful to do that. However, with Arthur and the fact that Arthur is integrated with Xero, you can have Arthur complete this task for you. And the big benefit of it is going to be accurate, and it's going to be done on a timely basis. And timeliness is really important when it comes to rent arrears. Okay, so that's the opportunity. Again, we go to the automated events tree, and we're going to, under the financial section, we're going to create late rent reminder on day 7. So that will be the trigger. And then I have 2 actions below this. So we're going to look at the send detailed email regarding rent arrears. Okay. So first of all, let's go to the trigger again. Very similar to the last trigger. The key thing is the method is the timed event. The due date is 7 days after the rent was due. And again, the rent needs to be unpaid. Okay, that's our trigger. Moving on, we're now creating the actual email itself. So we say the action name, send detailed email regarding rent arrears. We put in some text into the activity log as a record of what we've done. And then the key thing down here then is event message, and the event message is send message. Okay. And just to note it, but at the bottom there, send to, so we send to all property managers, and we actually send to the tenants, but we don't need to be specific, which is good, because that then means that this is more strategic. It's not being hard coded, and therefore, this is something that will work, regardless of change of tenancies or change of property managers. Okay, so that's the sort of initial data that we set, and then the rest of this then is it's more or less just it's the body of the email. I'm not going to go through this extensively, but as I mentioned, there's some brilliant functionality here that you can right click within, say, the body of the email, and Arthur allows you to select things like the tenancy, the renter's full name, the tenancy reference, the unit address, the due dates. These are the items that are in blue. And then most importantly, if you can see, there's a blue field in the main body, tenant outstanding transactions. That field produces a comprehensive list of all the outstanding rent transactions. So again, Arthur in this instance is doing all the hard work. Okay. Again, the text here is it's completely flexible. Depending on your client base and your approach, you can completely tailor the text to whatever you deem as appropriate for your business. Okay. So that's the second option, send arrears email. Last but not least, I guess depending on which market segment you're in, if you're in the professional market versus other market segments, it's probably fair to say that not all tenants take the time to set up a standing order to make sure that their rent is paid each month. So a strategy that one of my clients adopt is to make sure that we send an SMS rent reminder on the rent due date. Okay. It's probably fair to say that in this day and age, there's some people that don't read emails or only don't look at them on a very regular basis. But probably what we find is that people do look at their phone and they do look at SMS messages. So we found this to be very effective. So again, the reminder is there to assist the tenant, but I think it does demonstrate the professionalism of the landlord or the letting agency in terms of, you know, having the capability to actually remind people that the rent is due today. So that's option 3. So how do we do that? So again, we go to the tree, we go to financials, and then we're setting a trigger that occurs on the rent due date. Okay. So if we go to the trigger now, the trigger is very simple. So again, it's a timed event. The transaction type is direct rent, which I've mentioned here, but if you're a lettings agency, you know, you would include rent charge, and then the due date is plus 0 days. So the event will occur on the day that the rent was actually due. Okay, but again, the key thing here is it's a timed event, and then in terms of the process, the key thing to do is select the event method, and the event method is to send SMS. Okay. And then the SMS then is sent to the tenants. And then if you look at the next box, message, you can then insert a standard message being, dear, first name of the tenant. This is a friendly reminder that you rent of, and then it will actually can insert the amount of the monthly rent or the weekly rent, saying it's due, please ignore this reminder if already paid, and then your closing message then. So again, very effective tool, and again, it's something, you know, depending on your customer base, you know, this is something that's definitely worth consideration. Okay. So that ends our presentation. I hope you found that useful, and then we'll now kick it over to questions and answers.
Thank you so much for that, Pete. I think that was really interesting and should have been really useful to a whole lot of people. So yeah, like Pete said, if you've got any questions, please use the question and answer facility at the bottom. If you click on there and just ask a question, we'll definitely make sure to answer them now. Oh, great comment. Someone said this is the best and most relevant training ever. So well done, Pete. Got some good feedback so far.
Very kind, thank you.
Whilst we're waiting for anyone else to post through any questions, Pete, do you want to post if you can show your email? I think you put it on the first slide. Just to let everyone know, Pete is, like I said, one of our accredited accountants. And essentially what this means is basically he's not just accredited in Xero, but he's also accredited in Arthur. So if you need any financial advice or, you know, working alongside him to help manage your Xero, that's something we always highly recommend. You can see his email there, pete@theastutelandlord.com. So if you guys are interested in speaking to Pete more and work with him more, please do. So yeah. Perfect. Just one question's come in. How can we use the email to be specific to the tenant, e.g. to the tenant name in the email? I'm happy to answer that. So in Arthur, like Pete showed, there are certain fields for the automated events. And in the same vein, there was a field for tenant ref and a field for unit address. There's a field for tenant. I think it's just called to first name is the name of the field, if I can remember it correctly. And essentially that will ensure that it goes specifically to that person. So it's just a case of using the relevant fields, and Arthur will essentially ensure the right person is emailed and the right and relevant fields are pulled up.
So just on that, Jafar, so exactly on that point, if we look at the bottom of this slide, it says send to property managers and tenants. So by having tenants, it will effectively work out what the,
who the tenant is,
who the tenant is for you automatically, and yeah, that is the way to do it, because you want this to be generic. Yeah. You don't want to. So it's an interesting question. So you don't want really, rather than let's say property managers, what you can do is, I think you could specify. Let's say Jafar was working in your team, you could say Jafar. But the problem is if Jafar leaves the company, or if Jafar moves to a different role within the company, then those messages will go to him. So you're much better using like a generic group called all property managers, because it will update automatically as the property managers update on the system. So it's an interesting question, and thank you for that, Lee.
Exactly. Yeah, and then so just there's two more questions. Someone asked, how do we add the fields when we type it doesn't come up? If you right click, you'll see a selection of the fields. So you just have to right click and they'll show up.
Yeah. So those, just to slightly expand on that, if you can see the see the fields in blue on that screen, they have been created by right clicking and then selecting.
Yeah, just right click, then they come up as a list, and then you basically just search the list and find what you need to find. Lee asked if can tenants respond to a sent text via their phone text messages service and the messages received into Arthur's inbound messaging. No, they don't. They have to, if they respond via email or it's using the messaging, within the product, then it will come through. But text messages do not come through.
Yeah. So, but just on that point, Lee, may I just? I'll tell you what I do if I'm looking to speak to a tenant urgently. Normally, what I do is I use the messaging system generally, and I would send an email and I would send a text message simultaneously. What you can do here is you could replicate that here. So you could do this, for example, arrears email, but you could also, under the same trigger, could also trigger an SMS message as well. So you've got both bases covered. You've got email covered and you've got SMS covered. And I really think that is the most effective thing to do, because I genuinely believe, there are some tenants who don't look at emails on a regular basis, but I think in this day and age, I think people look at their phones and SMS messages just a little bit more, and so it's good to have both. Obviously, for an SMS, you can have less content. I think it's going to be a shorter message, and you might have detail in the email, so you might want to say something like, you've got rent arrears. I think you might be able to say how much the rent arrears are. We've just sent you an email that has all the detail around this. You could do something like that, which I think would be really helpful for the tenant. But then I also think it's very helpful for the landlord and letting agency as well, because it's all being calculated and it's all there in one place.
Exactly. Yeah, you get the benefit of you've got, if you email them and text them, they've got no excuse to say they haven't got it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Any more questions from anybody, or has that answered everyone's questions? Looks like nothing else is about to come through. We'll give it a few more seconds. Yeah, Pete, if you just want to scroll back to the first slide again, just so everyone can see your email. Petra says, Can you show the send email screen?
Okay, send email. Okay. Yeah, so why don't I run through it? It'll be very quick. So this is the send arrears email. So the trigger is it's a timed event. First of all, that's the most important thing. So we're sending the email 7 days after the due date for rent. The transaction types are direct rent and rent charge. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. And then the last bit is the rent is unpaid. Okay. And then what we do then is we populate the action, which is again, and the main thing is to collect, send message, send to property managers and tenants, and then you populate the email. Okay. So I hope that helps, Petra.
And Rick has asked if the slides would be available. So Pete is going to be running another presentation, the same one I think in 2 weeks' time on the next week actually, sorry, on the 25th. And then after that, we'll potentially release the slides and a recording potentially. And if not, I'm sure if you contact Pete personally, he can provide what and answer any questions you've got relating to copy on the slides.
Sure.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll wait a few more seconds if anyone comes in with any more questions. If not, then like I said, just drop Pete an email if you want to get in contact with him personally. It's pete@theastutelandlord.com. If you just want to get that up quickly, just so everyone's got a, if you want to screenshot that, drop him an email. Like I said, we highly recommend Pete. He's one of our first accredited accountants. And again, this is the second presentation he's given, and he's got another one next week if you guys want to recap what he went through. Looks like there are no more questions, so I just again thank you, Pete, so much for your time today. Very, very useful, and I hope everyone else enjoyed it today. And yeah, any questions, just please drop Pete an email. And Thank you so much for attending.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining online today. Much appreciated.
Okay, bye guys.